From the end of World War II in 1945 until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a lot of political tension and competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was called the Cold War. During this time, the two superpowers were in a global struggle for power in the political, economic, and military spheres. Both sides took steps to increase their influence and get the upper hand. The United States of America and the Soviet Union had ideas that were completely different from each other. This was one of the main reasons why there were so many problems between the two countries. The US was a capitalist democracy with a market-based economy and a system of government based on individual rights and liberties. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was a communist state with a planned economy and a one-party political system that put the interests of the state over the interests of the individual. The two countries' foreign policies, which often went against each other, showed how different their ideas were. The US, for example, promoted a policy of containment, aimed at preventing the spread of communism beyond the countries that were already under Soviet influence. On the other hand, the Soviet Union tried to spread its power and set up communist governments all over the world. Another major source of tension between the US and the Soviet Union was the arms race. In an effort to gain a competitive edge over the other, both camps amassed enormous quantities of military hardware, including nuclear weapons, in their respective arsenals. Because of this, both sides were living in a state of constant fear and anxiety out of concern that the other might spring a surprise attack on them. In addition to these things, there were also a number of specific incidents and events that made things worse between the US and the Soviet Union. For example, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 almost led to a nuclear war. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and the US-led boycotts of the Moscow and Los Angeles Olympics in 1980 also made things worse. Despite these problems, the US and the Soviet Union were still able to work together on some things, like arms control talks in the 1970s and 1980s. These efforts helped to reduce the threat of nuclear war and eventually led to the signing of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, which eliminated a whole class of nuclear weapons. In the end, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union that brought an end to the Cold War. The internal economic and political pressures that had been building in the Soviet Union for years finally came to a head, and the country was unable to continue on its current course. This led to the fall of the communist government and the rise of a Russia that is more democratic and focused on the market.